Hello and welcome to My Tiny Bottles, the project where I explore my grandmother's legacy of miniature liquor bottles, one tiny bottle at a time. I'm your host, Tammy Coxon, and I'm here today in cloudy but not rainy Glasgow, Scotland, with Neill Murphy. Neill, welcome.
Thank you very much. Yeah, it's a real pleasure to be here. As you say, it's not raining in Glasgow for once. It usually is. We have a saying in Scotland, though, that today's rain is tomorrow's whiskey. So, we need that water to turn into whiskey anyway. So,
yeah, it makes it worthwhile.
Absolutely. You've got to suffer for the good stuff that comes at the end,
So, Neill, I found by Googling, Glasgow, Scotland nerds, basically, I found him courtesy of a Facebook group. And I'm so thrilled you agreed to meet with this random American to talk whiskey. So, tell me a little bit more about yourself.
Yeah, well, if there's whiskey promised at the end of it, I'll meet anyone, So, but yes, I have been doing a bit of writing about whiskey since about 2015. I write a blog and I've done a little bit of podcasting, a little bit of live streaming. I work for a company called the Islay Whisky Academy. They're based out in Neill, do sort of educational experiences for tourists and guests from all over the world. Yeah, so whiskey's my passion in life, really. Outside of my family, it's the one thing I really care about, and it's an endlessly fascinating topic.
That it is an endlessly fascinating topic. I mean, even just researching this tiny bottle, I learned so many different things about Scotch and the history of it, and where it comes from, and also when it comes from. As viewers of My Tiny Bottles know, I spend kind of a ridiculous amount of time trying to figure out exactly when this bottle might have come from. And this one is pretty easy because of things like how proof is listed on the label, the volume, and the presence of the E.
Yeah.
I can sort of pinpoint this between 1976 and 1979. So what I was able to read and tell about, what I could maybe expect this to taste like, the consensus was probably not great when we talk about blended Scotch whiskies from the 70s.
Could be. It depends on the brand. Certainly the late 70s and into the early 80s were not a particularly happy time for the Scotch whisky industry, I don't think. So it could be that maybe quality was down a little then. I'm not sure, though. I wonder if there could be something a little surprising about this.
I hope so. And I don't know if I said it already, so I should interject to say that we're going to taste black bottle Scotch whiskey. So that is the brand that we're tasting, in case I didn't say that at the beginning. So you think there might be some surprises?
I'm quite keen to try this because black bottle has sort of famously changed over the years. I think originally when it first came out, it featured a lot of whiskies that came from the northeast of Scotland, and over the years it shifted towards a much smokier side, like the Western Isles and things, whiskies from the Western Isles, and they tend to have a much more robust, smoky character, and Black Bottle became famous for that smoky character. But in more recent times, it shifted back again, right, and that smokiness has sort of died down a little, so I'll be interested to see if we can pick up that little bit of smoke in this.
All right. So Scotch whiskey, folks who don't know, has to come from Scotland, has to be aged in Scotland and made in Scotland, and mostly from barley.
Yeah, so this is a blended Scotch. That means it's a combination of both malt whiskey and grain whiskey. So Scotch whiskey itself can actually be broken down into about 5 different categories. There's both grain whiskey and malt whiskey, and then through different combinations of them, we get 5 different drinks. Good, thank you. So you get single malt, which is made from 100% malted barley at one distillery. You can get a single grain, which is made from other grains like wheat, maize, rye, things like that, and it's made at a single distillery. You can combine different grain whiskies to get a blended grain. You can combine different malt whiskies to get a blended malt. Or the 5th category, which is actually the biggest of them all, is blended Scotch, where we take lots of different malt whiskies and some grain whiskies and blend them together to make this. Sorry.
I was just going to say, I'm already smelling the aroma from this. I cracked it open and poured while Neill was talking, and it is beautiful, even just from across the table, really aromatic. I'm getting like like caramel notes, I think was the first.
Toffee, fudge, that kind of thing. Yeah.
Mhm. That was the first thing I noticed.
Quite fruity as well.
Mm-hmm. Right, a little bit like raisiny.
Yeah. I think that there is a bit of sort of ashiness at the back.
All right, so that would hint that we'll get a little
Maybe a little bit
pickiness
of
from
smoke.
this.
Yeah.
You're right on the ashiness. I think that's tasty, but I'm like very much a Scotch amateur, right? I've tasted a few things. I'll go to parties. People say, "Here, try this," and but I haven't done a deep study, and I don't know all the differences.
Right.
This is to me quite peaty.
I think there's a bit in that. Now, I actually brought along. This is a little sample. I wish people watching could smell. But this is a sample of peated barley. So if you give that a wee nose, you should actually smell the smokiness. So when they dry the barley, they dry it over a peat fire and it absorbs all that smoky flavour, and that carries right through the distillation process. That's how we get it in the whiskey. But I think it's interesting to smell something like that and then go back to the glass and see if you can pick it out. But as I say, the fashion for peated whiskey has sort of ebbed and flowed over the years. Mm-hmm. We're very much back in a time now where peated whiskey is very popular. All the single malts of Islay are way up in price because the demand for them has gone so high. And things like Black Bottle have, although they shifted away from the smoke, they now seem to be creeping back towards it a little.
Well, it's so interesting to me because I think so many people maybe think they don't like Scotch because they associate it with the smoky ones. And this is the one that those people will be like, "Oh no, I don't like that."
Yeah.
But I can give them something like a Balvenie Doublewood or one of the really nice, sweet Speyside ones, and they're like, "Oh, this is Scotch. I didn't even know."
I think it's quite a common misconception. We talk about smoke so much with Scotch whisky. But actually now it's probably less than half. It might even be a significantly less than that even, that is actually sort of peated, that's smoky. Quite a lot of Scotch whisky isn't peated at all. Obviously peat was used to begin with because it was a natural fuel source, it was all they had.
You cut down all the trees.
Exactly. If you need to light a fire, you need fuel, and peat was readily available throughout the whole of the country, but particularly in the northeast. Once the railways arrived up to the northeast, they could bring coal and things like that. They didn't need to use peat anymore. So places like the islands, they held on to their peat much longer because it was harder to get coal over to them, So the island whiskies, the Islas, like Talisker and Skye, places like that, they tend to still have that. They still tend to have that kind of smoky character, whereas the ones in the northeast, up in Speyside and stuff, got lighter and fruitier. This, I think, is a combination of kind of all of that. You've got some of the lighter, fruitier stuff, the richer, maybe even some sherry casks in there, that sort of dried fruit note, raisins and sultanas and things like that. And then that sort of little bit of smoke, which is probably coming from Islay, I would imagine.
So I know it's common with Scotch to add a little bit of water.
It can, yeah.
And what would, what is that for? What does it mean? I'm going to add a couple drops and see what.
So most sort of master blenders and expert whiskey tasters would advise that you do add some water. I think it's entirely personal choice. I think some whiskies can be improved by a little bit of water, some aren't. I think it's all down to personal taste. It can be down to your mood at the time.
Oh, sure.
But certainly, I think a little splash of water can open up the whiskey a little. Sometimes it can be a little locked down, a bit stiff to begin with, and just a couple of drops of water seem to loosen it off a little, and more of its true character comes out there.
Well, this one's been stuffed for a while.
Well, exactly.
All right. So what do you think? Is it kind of what you were expecting? Better or worse than you hoped?
Well, I had hoped it would be good, and I think it is. I really like that, actually. I really like that. And I think the average sort of bottom shelf blend, which is what Black Bottle really is now, it's widely available, it's affordable. I think you can pick a bottle up now for maybe £15 in this country or so it's not expensive. I think that what we're tasting now is better than most bottom shelf whiskies that I can think of now. It's intriguing, actually. It's intriguing. You wonder. Obviously, Scotch is in a boom period now, and when things are booming, when things are being rushed out and produced in mass numbers, what does that do to affect quality, Whereas when things weren't doing so well, maybe they were putting all their best stuff in there.
Well, that is one of the things that I've heard about scotches, like from the 60s and 70s, where it wasn't very popular, and especially single malts, which we all, those are the sexy scotches that we think of today. But those weren't as popular. And so you had things that today would sell for very expensive bottles of single malt being put into these blends.
Absolutely, yeah. And I mean, even today, the single malt market, I think, only makes up about 15%. The rest is blended Scotch, So we think of single malts as the big thing. That's where the quality is and stuff. And it sort of is true, but
mostly it's where the marketing is.
Exactly, yeah. And blended Scotch can be just as good, and it flies the flag. Without the success of blended Scotch, we simply wouldn't have such a successful Scotch whisky industry. It's this stuff that really took the product all over the world.
It did. All right, so that was really interesting. I learned so much even just sitting here, so thank you for that. You talked a little bit about how this brand has come back, this brand has changed over time, and I see a wee bottle over there.
Yes, this is a more recent black bottle. You can see there the shape of the bottle has changed a little. The label design has changed, obviously. Obviously, the most notable change is the colour.
It's actually in a black
bottle. Yeah, obviously, famously, Black Bottle had to stop using black glass because when the First World War broke out, their supplier for black glass was in Germany, so they couldn't get it anymore. So Black Bottle, for a long part of its life, wasn't in a black bottle at all. They have since changed. I think around 2013, maybe. Around then, it went back to the traditional black glass. So this is a much more recent one. I don't know exactly what year, but in the last 3 or 4 years, anyway.
And how much experience do you have with this Scotch? Is this something you drink regularly?
It actually is something I usually have a bottle of. Yeah, it's. For things like when you're mixing or making drinks and stuff, I quite like to have blends around. Mostly if I'm sitting drinking a whiskey at night, it's maybe a malt or something, but I like to keep a supply of blended Scotch as well. And this is one of the ones that I tend to go for. I do think it's still a very good product. Again, for the price that they ask for it and stuff,
I don't get nearly that same woof of toffee. It's much less aromatic. This one smells yummy, right? Like this smells like dessert.
Much bigger nose on
the old one. Much bigger nose. I had the opportunity to taste some Irish whiskey from the 1950s, Redbreast. Up against the modern version. It was the same thing. The older whiskey was just like so much bigger.
I think, it's whiskey is a victim of its success in many ways. When you have to ramp up production and things, it's quite hard to maintain quality standards sometimes,
This is yummy. I would say this one, the modern bottle, tastes like the nose of the old bottle. Right? It's got the sweetness, the caramel flavors that I expected from the nose of the old one, but where I ended up getting a lot of ashy smokiness. And this has more of the toffee sweetness, a little bit of fruitiness up front, and then the ashiness is hidden.
There's a little bit of spice at the back of the new one as well that I didn't notice. A sort of cinnamon, gingery kind of thing.
I can see that.
Definitely not as smoky, the new one. Don't pick up anywhere near the same level of smoke. I don't think it's quite as rich. I seem to pick up a bit of kind of that sherry richness in the old. The new one feels a bit more like bourbon cask, that vanilla sweetness, the honey, the caramel and things, as you mentioned.
And they're the same alcohol proof, despite this one, the old bottle saying 70 proof. It was actually 80 proof at the time, just measured differently because numbers. So they're the same proof, but this, the new one, the modern one, to me, tastes hotter.
Yes.
Of course, I did add a little water, so maybe I should do that.
Taste a little younger, maybe.
No, right. Which is certainly a challenge because, whiskey has gotten so popular that now we don't have those old barrels sitting around just waiting. Where at the time, I think that's actually probably a good observation that the old bottle probably would have had older whiskeys.
And Black Bottle, of course, is a no-age statement. They don't tell you how old the whiskey is. We know it has to be more than 3 years, obviously, but, beyond that, it could be anything, really, Interesting. I do still get a faint bit of smoke in the new one, but it's nothing like.
It's really deep.
Yeah.
I'll get it on sort of the deep finish. I get this kind of ashiness, but it's not in your face or on your tongue, I guess, the way that the older bottle was.
It's interesting because I often hear people, I mean, I'm relatively new to whiskey, as I say. It's only maybe in the last 15 years or so that I got into whiskey. So I don't remember what the old black bottle was like, but I always hear people talking about how it used to be so much smokier, it used to be so much richer. And this confirms everything they said, I don't necessarily, it's not even so much that it's better, because I actually still think that new one is really good, but it's definitely different. It's definitely changed over the years,
And like you said, it's like, what's your mood? Sometimes people ask me that about cocktails. What's your favorite cocktail? I'm like, my favorite cocktail on a Tuesday.
Is it?
My favorite cocktail when it's raining. Right. There's so many different factors that
absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. It depends on the time of day. There's a very famous whiskey writer called Charles MacLean, and he tells a story when people ask him about what his favourite whiskey is. He tells a story about being out in a fishing boat with some close friends that you hadn't seen in many years, and somebody pulled out a bottle of like maybe the famous grouse or something, again a really affordable, available blend, but he said because of the circumstances and the people I was with and the stars out at night, that was the best whiskey I've ever had. So it's not always about the most expensive bottle, it's not always about the highest proof, it's not always about the colourful finish it's had. It's about the people you're sharing it with and the moment you're consuming it, and that's when whiskey really comes alive, I think.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining me today. This was fantastic. I am actually going to have Neill back to talk about another Scotch bottle that I have, but that'll be many bottles in the future, so stay tuned for that. But in the meantime, if folks want to find you, Neill, where are you online?
Yeah, so my blog is called whiskyreviews.net. Very simple. And obviously there's a Facebook page for that. Again, just Whiskey Reviews. And you can find me on Instagram at Whiskey Neill or on Twitter at Neill Murphy. And that's Neill with a double L. I don't know why. You would have to ask my parents why there's a double L. I don't know. But yes, it's Neill Murphy double L.
I just assumed it was a Scottish thing.
Yeah, I have no idea. No idea.
All right, well, thank you. And
Thank you, Sandra.